"Down on the ground, old man, now, or you get the volts." The shout from the black-clad SWAT officer, his face obscured by a helmet and visor, was harsh, amplified by the tension electrifying the air. Arthur Samuels, 73, a disabled veteran with a pronounced limp and a hand that trembled from old nerve damage, stood confused and terrified amidst a small crowd outside the pharmacy. He'd just been trying to get his heart medication. Before he could fully process the command, a blinding pain seared through him as the taser barbs hit. He collapsed, convulsing, in full view of shocked onlookers. 7 minutes later, as Arthur lay dazed and humiliated, the street was suddenly filled with the imposing presence of military vehicles, their occupants armed and moving with unmistakable authority. If you believed no veteran, especially one disabled in service, should face such an ordeal, type "never forget" below. Arthur Samuels lived a life circumscribed by pain, the chronic ache in his hip from a shrapnel wound sustained in Vietnam, the tremor in his hand from a nerve injury during a later peacekeeping mission, and the invisible wounds of PTSD that ambushed him in quiet moments. At 73, his days were a careful navigation of these limitations. He relied on a sturdy cane, his VA-prescribed medications, and the quiet routine of his small, sparsely furnished apartment. His only indulgence was a weekly visit to the local library and the necessary trip to the pharmacy for his heart medication, a trip he was making this sunny Tuesday morning. He walked slowly, his cane tapping a steady rhythm on the sidewalk, his mind on the simple errand ahead. He wasn't looking for trouble. Trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding men like him, men whose visible and invisible scars made them easy targets for misunderstanding, or worse. The pharmacy was located on a busy downtown street, and as Arthur approached, he noticed a commotion. A small crowd had gathered, and police cars were angled awkwardly, lights flashing. He paused, hesitant to walk into a potentially volatile situation. He just needed his prescription. Unbeknownst to Arthur, the police had received an anonymous and, as it would later turn out, entirely false tip about a suspicious, agitated elderly man, possibly armed, loitering near the pharmacy. The description was vague, but in the current climate of heightened alert, the local police department had overreacted, dispatching not just patrol cars, but a small SWAT unit that happened to be training nearby. The SWAT team, geared up for a high-threat scenario, arrived with an aggressive posture. They saw Arthur, an old man with a cane, looking slightly disoriented by the sudden police presence in the gathering crowd, and immediately zeroed in on him as the suspicious individual. Orders were barked. "You, old man! Hands where I can! See them! Get on the ground!" Arthur, startled and confused, his hearing not what it once was, tried to understand what was happening. He raised his hand slowly, trying to show he meant no harm. His cane clattered to the pavement. "Officer, I don't understand. I was just going to the pharmacy." His voice was quiet, easily lost in the surrounding noise. The lead SWAT officer, Officer Kane, young, adrenaline-fueled, and operating under the assumption of a potentially armed suspect, saw Arthur's fumbling, his slow response, his trembling hand, a result of his nerve damage, not guilt or defiance, as non-compliance, as a potential threat. "He's not complying. He's reaching for something," Kane yelled, though Arthur was merely trying to steady himself. "Taser! Taser! Taser!" The protocol shout was followed instantly by the distinctive crackle and the deployment of the electroshock weapon. 2 barbs struck Arthur in the chest. The world exploded in white-hot agony. Arthur collapsed to the sidewalk, his body convulsing uncontrollably, the taser wires trailing from his chest. The crowd gasped in horror. Several people started shouting at the police, "He's an old man! He's disabled! What are you doing?" Arthur lay there, dazed, humiliated, the smell of ozone acrid in his nostrils, the rough concrete scraping his cheek. He could hear the shouts, the confused babble, the barked commands of the SWAT officers who were now moving to handcuff him, still treating him as a dangerous suspect. His heart medication, the reason for his journey, felt 1,000,000 miles away. Through the haze of pain and disorientation, a cold, familiar anger began to surface. The righteous fury of a man who had served his country with honor, who bore its scars, now being treated like a dangerous criminal on a public street for no reason. He tried to speak, to explain, but his throat was raw, his body still trembling from the electrical shock. He was vaguely aware of someone rifling through his pockets, presumably looking for the non-existent weapon. They found his wallet, his VA ID card, a folded copy of his prescription. One of the regular patrol officers, looking uneasy, picked up the VA card. Sarge? This guy, he's a veteran, disabled, according to this. Officer Kane barely glanced at it. Lots of people are veterans. Doesn't make him any less of a potential threat if he's not complying with lawful orders. But the information had been relayed, and someone in that crowd, someone with connections, had already made a phone call. A very specific, very urgent phone call after witnessing the tasing of the elderly disabled man and hearing the word veteran. 7 minutes. That's how long it took for the world to shift on its axis on that downtown street. The SWAT team was still processing a dazed and trembling Arthur Samuels, the crowd still buzzing with outrage and confusion when the first unmistakable sounds cut through the noise, the deep, powerful thrum of heavy military engines, and the rhythmic whump-whump-whump of helicopter rotors approaching fast, heads turned, upwards. 2 Apache attack helicopters, flying low and with menacing grace, appeared over the city skyline, heading directly for their location. Simultaneously, from both ends of the block, a convoy of olive-drab military vehicles, Humvees, light armored vehicles, and even a heavy-duty troop transport truck roared into view, lights flashing, not police blue, but military amber, effectively and completely shutting down the entire street and surrounding intersections. Soldiers in full combat gear, armed with M4 carbines, disembarked with disciplined speed, establishing a tight, unreachable perimeter. Their movements precise, their expressions unreadable behind their goggles and helmets. Local police officers, including the SWAT team, froze, looking utterly bewildered and outranked. This wasn't a local incident anymore. This was something else entirely. From the lead lav, a ramp lowered, and a figure strode out, who radiated an aura of absolute command. He was a 4-star Army general, his uniform immaculate, his chest a constellation of distinguished service medals. This was General James Iron Jim Garrison, direct from the Pentagon, reportedly in the city for a high-level security briefing, but his presence here, now, with this level of armed escort, was anything but routine. He scanned the scene, his eyes cold as a winter sky, immediately locking onto the small, huddled figure of Arthur Samuels, being roughly handled by Officer Kane. General Garrison strode directly towards Arthur, his armed escorts fanning out, creating a clear, unassailable path. The local police, including the SWAT team, instinctively stepped back, their earlier aggression deflating in the face of this overwhelming display of federal military power. General Garrison's voice, amplified by a small comms unit, boomed across the street, cutting through the sudden silence. "Unhand that man, now!" Officer Kane, visibly shaken, his hand still on Arthur's arm, looked up at the 4-star general, then back at Arthur, then back at the general, his face a mask of confusion and dawning terror. He slowly, reluctantly released Arthur's arm. "Sir General, this man was non-compliant, a potential threat." "A potential threat," General Garrison repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he reached Arthur. He gently helped the still trembling veteran to his feet, supporting him with a firm hand. "This man, officer, is Sergeant First Class Arthur Samuels, retired United States Army. Recipient of the Silver Star, 3 bronze stars and 2 purple hearts. He lost half his hearing and the full use of his left leg defending an outpost in Kandahar that your entire SWAT team wouldn't last 10 minutes in. He turned his icy gaze back to Kane. His only non-compliance appears to be his age, his disability, and his misfortune to encounter an officer who mistakes his own adrenaline for tactical judgment. He then looked at the taser wires still attached to Arthur's jacket. "And you tased him?" The question was soft, almost gentle, which made it infinitely more menacing. Kane swallowed hard, unable to speak. "We received a report, General," a local police captain stammered, rushing forward looking terrified. "A suspicious individual, possibly armed." "And your response to a possibly armed elderly man with a cane is a full SWAT deployment and an immediate electroshock takedown in front of a civilian crowd without proper threat assessment or de-escalation." General Garrison countered, his voice like Arctic wind. "Is that current police protocol, or just your protocol when dealing with disabled veterans?" He then spoke into his comms. "Med team on me, priority 1, and get the Pentagon legal liaison on the line with the mayor's office and the chief of police. I want a full immediate federal review of this department's use of force policies, especially concerning vulnerable populations and veterans. Consider their federal funding under advisement." The implications were devastatingly clear. The military. Medics were at Arthur's side in seconds, their efficiency and gentle care a stark contrast to the earlier aggression. They carefully removed the taser barbs, checked his vitals, and provided immediate comfort. General Garrison stood by, a protective, formidable presence. Officer Kane and the rest of the SWAT team were ordered by their own captain to stand down, their faces a mixture of shame, fear, and resentment. The crowd watched in stunned silence, witnessing an almost surreal display of power and accountability. The false anonymous tip, it would later be discovered, came from a disgruntled neighbor of Arthur's with a petty grudge, never imagining the hornet's nest it would stir. Within the hour, Arthur Samuels was being escorted, not to a police station, but into one of the general's black sedans, heading to a military hospital for a full checkup. His dignity slowly being restored, General Garrison personally assured him that his medical needs would be met. His housing situation would be reviewed by the VA at the highest level, and that those responsible for his mistreatment would face a thorough investigation. The Pentagon did indeed initiate a review of the local police department's practices, leading to significant reforms: mandatory retraining in de-escalation and ADA compliance, and the suspension of Officer Kane pending the outcome of multiple investigations. The story of the disabled veteran tased in front of a crowd, only to have the Pentagon dispatch armed escorts and a 4-star general to his aid, became a national headline, igniting a fierce debate about the treatment of veterans, police use of force, and the often invisible wounds of service. Arthur, a quiet man who had only sought his heart medication, inadvertently became a catalyst for change. He never sought the spotlight, but his ordeal and the swift, decisive intervention it triggered served as a powerful reminder. Some veterans, no matter how humble or disabled, are still watched over by a brotherhood that spans generations and commands formidable resources. And when one of their own is unjustly harmed, the response can be swift, unequivocal, and echo all the way to the highest levels of power, because true honor demands protection, and sometimes that protection arrives with the full force of a grateful nation, ensuring that no sacrifice is ever truly forgotten or disrespected. Subscribe to Hidden Sparks if you believe our disabled veterans are heroes who deserve our utmost care, and that accountability must always follow injustice.